This is a sailing podcast with David and Karina Anderson, episode number 67. We would love you to support us on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/sailing. Hello again, it's David Anderson here, and thank you for joining me for the 67th episode of the Sailing Podcast. Now, today's conversation, I caught up with Ross Gerber and Topher Cochrane, and the topic is their newly released sailing movie called Chasing Bubbles. Now, the film's about a circumnavigation by a friend of theirs, Alex Rust, and during the interview, we hear about what compelled them to make the movie. You can watch the Chasing Bubbles movie right now. It's for free, up on YouTube or Vimeo. I think Vimeo seems to be the best option for people who aren't in the US. That's where I watched it. And, maybe find a time to watch the movie and then share it with your friends as well. I actually watched the movie before I spoke to Ross and Topher, and, there's probably a case for you watching it before you listen to the rest of the podcast, because we do discuss the storyline in quite some detail during the interview. But I'll post links to the movie and some of the other things that we chat about at thesailingpodcast.com/67, just in case you want to look for it later on. And now, here's the interview. Hi Ross, hi Topher, welcome to the Sailing Podcast. How are you guys going?
Hello, hi.
Hey, we're great.
Thank you for having us.
I know, it's my pleasure. I was really excited when you guys sent me an email and sort of brought to my attention the movie that you guys have worked on. It's called Chasing Bubbles, and it's about the adventures of a guy called Alex Rust, and I'll ask in a minute just sort of what your relationships were to Alex. But I have to tell you that I have to ask you a question. Have you guys ever heard of the term larrikin?
No.
I have not heard of that term, no.
Larrikin.
Yeah, it's an Australian word. And, just sort of, when I watched the movie, I thought that Alex Rust really fell into that sort of character. It's an Australian term. I looked it up on like an Urban Dictionary to find the true definition, and it says, a larrikin, it's a rogue. It says Australian personality or a bush person, but it's marked by enthusiasm, passion, and zest for life, and living life to the fullest extent possible. So, do you see what the sort of similarity is, perhaps, to Alex Rust?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, he was a zealot for life, for sure. Yeah, he wanted to experience everything and see all the places and know all the people.
So the movie, and I feel like I'm treading carefully because I don't know whether people who are listening to the podcast have seen the movie or not. So, but can you guys give me, or can somebody give me a quick sort of overview of what Chasing Bubbles is about? Sure.
It is about a young guy in his late 20s, mid 20s, who escaped a somewhat typical 20-something lifestyle, at least what that's like for someone in the United States, successful 20-year-old, to live with less. And he wanted to see the world, and he wanted to do it as efficiently and as directly as possible. So he went down to Florida and he bought a very cheap sailboat off of Craigslist and taught himself how to sail, sort of pulled himself up by his boat shoes, I guess, and eventually ended up sailing around the world. He just started island hopping from island to island in the Caribbean and then made his way into the Pacific. That's where, I guess Ross joined him from the very beginning there.
Yeah, and I mean, in the movie really follows his journey through the entire trip and sailing around the world. And looks at how that journey kind of changes someone. And I guess, the reason why it's unique is, he was the age he did it at, I think, is unique, and just the way that he wanted to see the world was unique in getting to places that most people wouldn't risk their boats to go to. He went to all those places, and the movie kind of shows all the places he went, and he had, 80 different crew members sail with him, kind of features a lot of those people, and then how that changes someone that kind of accomplishes their life goal. when they're 28.
Yeah, it touches on a lot of themes. So I guess the bones of the movie are it's about a young guy who gives up everything he has in order to sail around the world, which he does. And then we kind of explore what that means to a human being, to kind of give up your identity in this sort of iPhone world that we live in now and sort of go, out and sail across oceans with people, meeting people along the way, what that does to a person. And
can I just say, it's interesting because a lot of people think all the great adventures have already been had. There's not sort of opportunity to go off and do much exploring these days. I think the movie certainly shows that there's a big world out there and there's lots of adventures still to be had.
Certainly, the thing that I like to say is that what I think people who maybe aren't sailors or aren't open ocean sailors might not consider is that when you're sailing out there, you are truly an astronaut. I mean, you are thousands of miles away from another human being when you're sailing across the Pacific or across the Indian Ocean, where literally the next closest humans to you on your 30-year-old fiberglass boat are the astronauts on the space station passing overhead. I mean, you're totally an explorer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And look, you're talking about sort of like the message of the movie and what people get out of it. I want to say, first of all, congratulations. It's a great movie. It really is inspiring. And I love the way you guys have put it together. I feel like it's been put together with a lot of love. It's not a term boys usually like to talk about to each other.
Thank you for saying so.
But, you guys both had, a friendship with Alex. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you guys all know each other?
Sure, I'll start. And this is Ross. If you didn't get that, but so I actually met Alex when I first moved to Chicago. He was a trader on the Chicago Board of Trade, trading soybean meal, and he worked with my roommate. And we met at one of our parties, and we both actually
25 years old.
Yeah, about 25 years old, and he was probably 23 at the time, but anyways, we met at that point, and we both had a trip to Cuba planned, which, at the time it was tough for Americans to get there. And bizarrely, we both had a trip planned. So I ended up in Cuba with him less than, 6 weeks after we first met. And from there, we just continued to travel together until, one time he proposed sailing around the world. And months later, he had called me from Florida and said he'd quit his job in Chicago and bought a boat on Craigslist. And he had never sailed before he bought that boat. So I, kind of being a guy that he had traveled with a lot and we were close buddies, I flew down to teach him everything I knew. And that's kind of the beginning of the journey. But that's how I knew Alex. And then I sailed with him through the trip and then helped with the movie.
Yeah, and I met him shortly after Ross did. I didn't know him as well. I also sort of knew him as another sort of 20-something sort of bopping around Chicago. I was a young filmmaker when I met him, working at an advertising agency, making TV commercials for a living. And I was also a sailor, as is Ross. So that's kind of what brought us all together. I didn't have the courage to sort of give up everything and leave when they did. So I didn't go along. But when Alex did sail around the world afterwards, he and I picked up a conversation we just slightly started before he left about what if this was a documentary. And he had been shooting all this footage as he sailed. So I suggested to him, why don't we take all this footage that you've shot and log it and organize it and then create a narrative thread? And I began sitting him down with a camera and interviewing him and sort of trying to get to the bottom of what it is to go on an adventure like this and find out sort of firsthand, like what it does to someone. And then also try to sort of explore his adventure with him a little bit. And, it's hard not to spoil the movie. I mean, we kind of give it away at the very beginning of the film, but, while we were chasing bubbles, while we were shooting those interviews and going through all of his footage from his adventures, Alex died. He after having been sailing for 3 years and kind of pointing his boat towards the horizon and steering it wherever he felt like, sort of is it going to be Madagascar? Is it going to be Durban today? Is it going to be Cape Town, or is it going to be Namibia? Should I go for St. Helena or the Canaries? Like literally deciding every day what he wanted to do. And then suddenly being back in the United States and sort of having to deal with getting a driver's license and wearing shoes into the bar and meeting me to, do these interviews every day. He got what he described to me as itchy feet, and picked up and left and went to India. And he was exploring India by motorcycle and by foot by himself. And a little while later, Ross had to call me, actually. Alex's brother called Ross, and Ross called me to let me know that Alex had passed due to a bout with typhoid fever. So, yeah, I mean, I guess you said that it was a very personal movie. It felt like a very personal. I'm so glad you said that, because it was. I mean, Alex was our friend, I mean, he was our age, and he was we shared a lot of passions and interests, and he was kind of a wild, fun guy to be around. So we really enjoyed being around him. And so when we were making this movie as a passion project for our friend, and then he left, left this life and kind of left all this footage and this adventure with us in this story, it became our responsibility to deliver it to folks. So it's, in addition to being a passionate film to make, it became sort of a responsibility to us to kind of make this thing.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I mean, and yeah, just because that sort of idea originally to sort of capture a lot of footage, you've got just tons of footage from just such amazing places throughout the journey. I wasn't sure if we were going to mention whether Alex had passed away, so I'll put a little disclaimer perhaps at the start of the podcast just to say to people, look, if you haven't seen it, like, spoiler alert, if you want to sort of...
I don't know how we to not address it. And then when we were making... we didn't start editing the movie until, a year and a half after he'd passed. So whilst creating the narrative, we've got a foreshadowing right at the very beginning of the film. Alex, sort of addresses the audience and addresses sort of his what if he's not around anymore kind of question. And then Ross has to say the same thing to camera, sort of right at the beginning of the film. And then I think sort of throughout it, there's the question of sailing across an ocean is a dangerous thing, and choosing to live your life that way, always chasing an adventure, always sort of pushing the limit of exploring the planet on a budget or in a new way. I mean, it's you have to be willing to take certain risks, and Alex was willing to take those risks. So
yeah,
the film kind of touched
now.
a bit.
Can I just ask Ross? Ross, were you on the boat for the whole trip?
No, I wasn't. I was on the boat 4 separate times. I flew down originally to sail from Florida through the Bahamas, and then I joined back up in the Cunayala Nation. That's kind of off the between Colombia and Panama. I met the boat, and then I was on the boat then for about 4 months. So through the Panama Canal, Galapagos, and then all of French Polynesia. And then I left from Tahiti and flew back, worked for a year and a half, and then went back in East Africa for Madagascar, and then met the boat for the kind of like his around the world party. So in total, it was about 6 months total.
So Ross sailed from Florida through the beginning of the Caribbean islands, Bahamas, Upper Antilles, went back to the United States, then flew down to Panama and sailed across the Pacific Ocean to French Polynesia, then flew back to the United States, then returned to the boat in Madagascar.
Right. Okay. And I saw that there was one guy, maybe you can just tell me a little bit about it. Did you pick somebody up in the Galapagos? Because when I was watching the movie, I don't know that guy's name. Who was it?
Yeah, that was so I mean, kind of one of the themes of really Bubbles in the boat was that Alex was continually picking people up. So there were 80 or 90 crew member that sailed with him. So when I hopped on the boat, there were like 6 people from Colombia that were at Mardi Gras with him that had sailed across. We picked up a guy in Finland named Panu who sailed for a long time, and he's kind of plays a big part in the movie. He was on the boat from Panama through the Galapagos, but he's also interviewed in India. Kind of a big thinking yoga type of guy. Absolutely amazing dude. And then in the Galapagos, Panu had to get off the boat, but we were surfing and we met a kid who had just graduated from high school, and he was a bodyboarder, and he needed a lift to a different island. And on the way, he said, "You know what? I don't." He asked us where we're going, and he didn't really have a job lined up for after high school, and his parents were guides in the Galapagos.
This is Diego.
And yeah, this is Diego. And so Diego said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I want to sail with these dudes. They're amazing sailors," which I think wasn't quite true. But he didn't really know where he was going, and his parents got him his passport, and he sailed with us, and he ended up sailing on Bubbles for I think the longest. I think he was on 18 months total. But he left the boat and then he rejoined the boat. But I think it was around 18 months. But it was an 18-year-old kid from the Galapagos who had never really done much sailing, but was up for the adventure.
Right. Now, that makes sense because I saw him in the movie quite a lot. Almost got the feeling that he'd been on the boat the most. So that sounds right.
Yeah.
I mean, that just sounds amazing, just sort of being open enough as a captain, for Alex to just take strangers on board all the time. Did that ever cause any problems that you're aware of?
I don't know if there were any like super major problems. Alex was an easygoing guy, and he would he instilled confidence in people. So I think it and just his general attitude kind of kept the crew calm. But there were surely, even with Diego, we had some, and he was quite a bit smaller guy than both of us. But we're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it's I don't know if you've crossed the Pacific or been out for that long, but I mean, a lot of marriages end when you're at sea that long, just because you cannot get away from someone. So there was a time in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I think it was in the Pacific, and Diego was upset about something. I can't remember it, but he it wasn't close to a fight, but it was very confrontational. But for the most part, I think it was pretty easy going. I don't know if I don't remember hearing from Alex if there's any real terrible crew situations. I don't know if he just got lucky or what, but I don't remember hearing anything terrible, and it wasn't ever real bad when I was on the boat.
I did think it was pretty amazing that you guys picked Diego up in the Galapagos. I was asking you guys when I first started making the film. So you and Alex were partying in the Galapagos. You met a young surfing kid who had never left the Galapagos Islands and convinced him to get on your sailboat and sail across the Pacific Ocean with y'all. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the theme. So he'd always have. I mean, I think that was a pretty unique example for Diego. But we were having crossed from Panama to the Galapagos and done some small crossings within the Galapagos. We knew that we needed a third person, and it had actually come down to like there was a French couple, and so it was a young couple. They were married, but I think they were like 23. And it just didn't quite feel right. And we knew we needed someone, and it was pretty much between them and Diego. And Diego was a super laid-back guy. He was really polite. And it worked out really well. He's become like a little brother to me. It was we just became really close, and he was a hard-working guy. So, it was a great time having him out there.
Good personality fit.
Yeah.
But can I just go back to the start? Because you're saying that Alex didn't have much experience sailing, which I think is a good sort of introduction to the whole adventure, because a lot of people are perhaps, shy or think that they're not capable of jumping on a boat and having an adventure. So I think the story really tells that side of it, that people can just sort of teach themselves to some degree. There's probably a few old sea dogs out there arguing that you probably need to have a bit more experience than that before you start crossing.
We've had a lot of people
oceans.
tell us, certainly. We've had a lot of people, and Ross and I are sailors. We've got a yacht here where we live in Chicago. We've had a lot of people sort of see the film and tell us how reckless it feels to them for someone to just get out on a boat and go. And certainly it is kind of reckless to buy a boat so cheaply and just sort of push off towards an island with little provisions, or, I mean, you all did provision, and you did plan to some degree, but I guess what I was trying to present as a sailor and as a human is sort of the other side of the story. I mean, I think a lot of people plan and prep and read cruising blogs and argue on message boards about what the right EPIRB is, and maybe go do a little coastal cruising, or maybe they, sail a bit. Alex had no experience and he just went for it. I mean, that feeling that you get in your gut when you first push away from a coast, towards the horizon, not knowing what weather you're going to expect, or what kind of seas, or what kind of harbor you're going to have when you get to the other side.
Yeah, and I actually kind of going to rightly so. People think it was reckless, but I think a lesson that a lot of people can take is that in a lot of old sailors had talked to me while we were getting ready to push off for some of these things, was that, you know what, you can go to any harbor and talk to someone who's going to go next year. And there's 10 guys that are 60 years old or 65 and they're ready to go next year as soon as this gets fixed or that gets fixed. What kind of made Alex unique and probably motivational to them is that he talked to people, and it looks reckless, but we did a lot of checking to ask people who were experts to say, like, hey, is this boat ready to go? We may have lacked in experience in a lot of ways, but the boat was very much in good enough shape to go, and went for it. And there are people that are, on their deathbeds that were very much, I guarantee, ready to do it and never pushed off because they were just, too scared and didn't think they were ready. And I think this is a little bit of nudge to those type of people to be like, hey, it can be done. Obviously, prepare yourselves. Don't go out there and try to put yourself in terrible positions, but go for it.
But yeah, I guess, and for those of you sailors out there who are preparers, which is most sailors, they're planners, they're preparers, they're engineers, they're electricians, they're guys who've been preparing their whole life to go take whatever one trip they take. There is another side. There's a guy who's all guts and all balls, who just goes for it. And there's something to be said for that. I mean, there's a certain courage required to go and make that leap. And there's a certain part of your personality that's necessary in order to get up and go. And that was all Alex. And I thought that was would sort of set him apart from some other sailors. It was sort of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how much you prepare, you still have to take that first trip. And, that you're still going to be nervous. I mean, I remember the first time I sort of went off and randomly bought like a little $2,000 trailer sailor boat and took the family out to this little bay, and we pushed off, and my wife was screaming and I was pulling on this and pulling on that. I mean, there's nothing like a sort of real life adventure to sort of make you work everything out in a real hurry.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's why it appeals, and I'm sure, I'm sort of that Australian demographic. It really appeals to me, that sort of just have a go mentality. I think at the end of the day, you can prepare too much, like you say, it can be, what is it? Something by procrastination. Anyway, you can
death by procrastination.
Death by procrastination. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So Alex would be the other's the flip side of that.
Yeah. So there's a nice balance in there. But I think for people who are sort of considering going sailing, I mean, it inspires you to go, well, that guy didn't sort of study everything that was out there, and he successfully got going. And the other end of that question is, did you see Alex develop as a captain over time? Because people who spend that much time on the water, they really hone down their skills. I mean, you're an expert. He must have been an expert by the end of the trip.
Yeah, I mean, well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but when and I grew up sailing on a small lake in northern Wisconsin, so me teaching him was kind of I didn't have much to offer, but the basics. So when he started, we were literally arguing about the most basic concepts of sailing. So he went from literally never having sailed to he lost his engine in multiple places. I mean, in Thailand, where he's sailing around coral heads in wind and going into harbors with no engine. So from the perspective of sailing skills, he turned into a hell of a sailor who is very capable of navigating in and out and getting around reefs, etc. And I think as far as his just the mentality of a captain, it started out very much, we're going to party, we're going to get as many people on the boat and have a good time. And at the end, it was, especially like crossing the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, he kind of knew, I think, the personalities to have aboard, what it was going to take to keep the morale high. So I think he was always pretty good in that way, but he became quite a bit more focused and very much matured as a true captain.
Yeah. I didn't catch it during the movie. I think I found somewhere online that Bubbles was a 39-foot sailboat. Do we know what sort of model or design it was?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's two boats in the movie, and I threw up a little schematic animation when we sort of introduced the two boats. When he initially went down to Florida and sold his minivan that he'd driven down there and bought a boat on Craigslist, that was a Hunter 27, 1977 production American coastal cruiser that he really oversailed. It had a little Yanmar single cylinder diesel in it, and he bought it full of water, swamped out, and tied up to some municipal pier and some Florida mangrove. And he and his girlfriend Vanessa and a couple of his buddies from rural Indiana, they cleaned it up as best they could and sailed it out on the Atlantic there in Florida, learning how to sail on that boat. Ross taught Alex some of the basics of tacking and direction relative to the wind and sort of basic sailing on that Hunter 27. And then Alex sailed that boat, Florida, Bahamas, Antilles, BVI's, the whole Caribbean chain all the way down to Venezuela, and sold the boat in, I think, Turks and Caicos.
Curacao.
Curacao. Yeah, right. Yeah, way down there in Curacao off the coast of Venezuela. And then raised a little bit more money trading pork futures. Well, he bought the first boat for $3,000 and sold it for $7,000, and then swung trade pork futures on the American agricultural futures market, raised $70,000 and used that money to buy Bubbles, or the boat that he named Bubbles, which was a 39-foot fast passage that's made by a company called Tollycraft. There aren't many. They made about 40 boats, full fast passage 39s. From what I've read, they're considered to be very good blue water boats. They're fast for 39 feet. They cruise at 7 to 8 knots, and they're considered to be very well built. They've got not a full keel, but sort of a half encapsulated keel, and very well reinforced rudder and rudder post and everything, and then a big 4-cylinder single diesel engine.
Have you seen a fast passage before, David?
No, I hadn't. I just had to jot that one down. I'll have to have a look at it later.
It's actually, I think there were 30. I think there were like 20 hulls on the first run and 19 on the second. And we saw when I was on the boat, I think we saw 3 or 4 out sailing. People claim they're extremely capable, and there's actually a book written about. I think the first single-hand race around the world. There was a book written called Moonshine. And that kind of made the fast passage famous because the guy who sailed it, and I can't remember the captain's name, he took second place, and I think a Japanese guy won. But the fast passage had turned around to help someone. Anyways, that book Moonshine had made the fast passage famous, and that boat Moonshine we actually saw sailing out. We knew the guy in Panama, and we saw, I think, 2 others while I was out with him, 2 different fast passages.
Okay.
It's known in the circumnav cruising community. It's known as a good boat.
Yeah.
Excellent. And what about the boat you guys have now that you've sort of mentioned a couple of times that you're sailing around Chicago? What's that boat?
Yeah, that's right. We live on Lake Michigan here in Chicago, which is for those of you who don't live here in the United States, it's 80 miles across and 380 miles from end to end, and it connects to other giant Great Lakes here. I don't know what that is in kilometers. That's,
I don't know,
150 kilometers across and 500 kilometers from end to end. So there's some pretty major blue water cruising to be done right here in the center of the United States. And we a few years ago, Ross and I bought a CNC 27 Mark V. Boat's called Disco. And we're sailors and just needed something to sail around here. I actually, whilst we were making this movie, after Alex passed, I I sold all of my stuff on Craigslist, all of my furniture and television and stereo equipment and whatever, and moved out of my apartment here and to buy my share of disco, and lived on the boat for 2 years. Just in the harbor here in Chicago, we've done some extensive cruising here on the Great Lakes.
Isn't it really cold there?
We got about a half a season, so we haul the boat out during the winter. We haul it out in November, around November 15th. Put it up on the hard dock. The lake doesn't freeze. It's too big. It's a freshwater body of water, but it's too large to freeze over. But we haul it out just because it's too cold to sail here during the winter, and then the boat goes back in late April. So we've got about a 7-month season here.
Excellent. And you said that you were doing that while you were putting the film together. Just explain to me a little bit, because I'm sort of a bit late to the story, because you had a Kickstarter project as well. Is that right?
Sure. So I guess the order of happenings is Alex and Ross left from the Florida coast with some cheap video cameras, and they sort of filmed happenings. They filmed things as they happened. And 3 years later, Alex landed back in the BVIs where he'd started with Bubbles and returned to Chicago with a hard drive full of footage. And then Alex and I sat down, and this would be the fall of 2013. We sat down with a Canon 5D and a stool to sort of so I could interview him and sort of try to capture an audio version of the story. And then Alex died in the spring of 2014. And then I think in the spring of 2015, we created a Kickstarter to hire some editors, because there was just hundreds of hours of footage. And between our day jobs and our lives, Ross and I just did not have time. And we have another partner, Lori, who's worked on it with us as well. We just didn't have time to edit all of that footage. So we raised some money to hire editors to help us go through it all and sort of craft the thing.
Oh, it must have just been like, if it was 3 years and lots of cameras, it must have been just mountains of footage.
Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of hours, yeah.
Hundreds of hours, and then on top of that was all the interviews that were shot. So when Alex got back from sailing and kind of had this vision, he was flying around and trying to interview as many people as he could, because he wanted to make a film that was kind of highlighted his crew. He wasn't trying to make a film about himself. Yeah. Obviously, it changed quite a bit upon his passing. It just didn't make sense to focus on the crew when there was this kind of amazing person who we had all these interviews with.
Right.
So,
right. We first set out to make it. It was supposed to be a story of a boat that sails around the world, and what it takes for young people to sort of get together and do that thing as sort of frugally as possible. But then, Alex, it became a story about Alex while making it and after he passed.
I just popped into my mind. We were talking about Bubbles before. Do you know where the boat is now? Did it get sold?
Yeah, he sold it in the BVIs, and he bought it. It was renamed. I can't remember the name. It's like Monty or something. Or
Monty. He bought it from a yacht broker in Tortola, Nanny K. Tortola in the BVIs. It was named Grey Wolf.
It was named Grey Wolf. He renamed it Bubbles.
He recommissioned it Bubbles, and then he sailed it around the world, rebuilding the engine 3 times, replacing the autopilot. Replacing shrouds and I think original sails, but sort of slowly replacing parts as he sailed around the world. And then when he finally sailed it back into Nanny K. Tortola 3 years later in the spring of 2012, he sold it back to that same yacht broker.
And I think it was for quite a bit less, because he had, I don't know if you can tell from the movie, but that, Alex was good at a lot of things, but the standard upkeep that I think most yachtsmen think of in keeping, the wood in good shape and that sort of thing wasn't on the top of Alex's list. So I think the boat sold for quite a bit less. And actually, when we were pulling in on the round the world trip, the propeller fell off. So it was like
that last leg.
Yeah, it was a very fitting end to his journey that he actually was rafted up with 2 dinghies and 30 people on board, because he was he was getting blown into rocks because he had no propeller, and he kind of
the
lost
last
feeling.
500, 600 meters, pulling into the harbor from which he left, they lost propulsion, and they were literally towed in. He used his dinghy to tow himself across the finish line.
Yeah, it's probably hard to have like high standards of sort of keeping your boat spick and span if you've got lots of strangers coming in and out of the boat, because then you're just going to freak out every time somebody scratches one of those nice polished bits of wood. It becomes, I guess, if he was territorial about it, that's going to sort of stop or inhibit what he was into anyway.
I'll say two things. Alex was never the type to freak out about anything like that. It was very difficult to get Alex Russ to A, freak out, and then B, Alex Russ was a creature of necessity. I mean, I think that was one of the things that I was sort of trying to say with the movie, is that he would do the minimum required for what was necessary. So like if he wouldn't buy a bunch of sort of redundant equipment, he would he bought and equipped the boat with the minimum of what was needed to make those passages, because he was a young guy with limited means, and he was inviting friends with limited means who everyone paid their own way. I mean, when Ross came, Ross would bring whatever equipment was needed, and people would pay for their share of diesel fuel or whatever. And Alex is, for that reason, because they were all sort of young, free-spirited people, Alex was trying to sort of figure out how to do things as efficiently as possible.
Now, I sort of distracted what I was thinking about before. We were talking about the Kickstarter, putting the movie together, and I don't think we mentioned it yet, but you guys have popped it up for free for people to watch, which is pretty awesome. I mean, I don't know whether there was any other option to putting up for free. I mean, what was the thinking there?
So, I mean, the whole goal of the movie, once we started creating it, and even when Alex was around, he wanted to get the story to as many people as possible, just to show him, like, he grew up in Southern Indiana, and there aren't a lot of people that have the opportunity to go out and do the things that he got to do. And he wanted to show those people, like, hey, there isn't just Indiana, there's all these other things. So he wanted it available for free to as many people as possible. And, upon his passing, that we kept on with that goal. So we're not trying to profit at all off of this. That was never the point. It was just to get his story and kind of his inspiration in front of as many people as possible. And YouTube ended up being the easiest way to do that.
Excellent. I actually watched it on Vimeo, if that makes any difference.
Oh, yeah. And
of course. Yeah, for all you international viewers out there, use the Vimeo link.
Excellent.
YouTube's tricky.
Yeah, and I'll put a couple of links with the show notes for this, but I'm pretty sure if people just Google around for Chasing Bubbles, that's probably the quickest way to find. Yeah,
we're Chasing Bubbles at Facebook, facebook.com/Chasing Bubbles. Chasing Bubbles is on YouTube. It's Chasing Bubbles on Vimeo, and we've got a website, chasingbubblesmovie.com. Widely available and very free.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, you guys.
Just like anyone can sail around the world, anyone can watch the movie.
No, that's right. I think it'll become sort of well known as a classic adventure for people sailing. So I think it's great to sort of share it, because it hasn't actually been out all that long, has it?
We're at
2 weeks,
2.5 weeks right now.
Yeah.
It was not last Wednesday, but the Wednesday night before we released it. So this is we're talking right now on Saturday. So that's 17, 18
2.5 weeks, something. Yeah, it's found a humble but very happy audience so far. We're very happy about the feedback we've gotten and the people who've passed it around and watched it, taken the time to watch it so far.
That's good. You guys have just dated it as about 2 weeks ago, so now you're going to make me have to rush to get the podcast out so that when I put it out, people will go, hang on, it says it's been out for 3 months, and then those guys are saying it's been out for 2 weeks. What are you doing, David? So I'm pretty keen to get this one out and share that message around. I think that's terrific. So that's good. We've covered all the social media places people can find you. Maybe just as a sort of a reflection from you guys, it's out, you're doing a good job, you're sort of trying to get the word out about it. In sort of, do you think it's changed, you guys? Because it must be really, like, you've just had this in the forefront of your mind that one of your your friends, you've had to sort of watch them reach a peak, and then, not all of us sort of see a close friend die at a young age. And how does it affect you? We talked about Alex having sort of itchy feet and reaching out to meet goals. Did it sort of make you guys realize that life is finite? What am I trying to say? That there's finite, that we're all going to die?
Well, I guess that it certainly reminded us that we only get one shot at this. There is no later. I mean, this is it. I mean, sailing is hard on you, and a lot of people. What's sort of mind-boggling to me is a lot of people save their plans to go sailing or to explore or fulfill their dreams until after they retire, which is absurd to me. I mean, it's so much easier to have these adventures when you're younger. Don't throw your back out as easily. And then maybe reflect later rather than plan now and adventure later. I guess it just sort of, losing Alex was just sort of a heavy, in addition to being incredibly sad and life-changing for me for other reasons, it was a fact that reinforced how important it is to seize the day as it is. This is it. You don't know how much time you have, so whatever it is you want to do it now.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Were you going to say something, Dayton?
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting. I was being out sailing and having the long crossings and kind of getting into Alex's head when he was out there. Just the both of us kind of thinking, talking about our dreams and what was going to be after, what was going to happen after sailing, which is it's kind of funny when you're out cruising. The one question you don't ask people is, what are you going to do next? Because it really is a scary thing for people that are out cruising to say, hey, I've been doing this. This has been, my identity for a while, and it's been so exciting. When I come back to the real, the so-called real world, what am I going to do? And that it's funny in the cruising world how that's just a question that is you just don't ask people. So kind of going through this movie and in really trying to I don't try to analyze Alex too much, but we have these interviews with him where he's finished and he's having kind of a rough time assimilating back into life, and then after the passing and kind of watching this footage over and over and thinking about where he was at, it makes you wonder what's what you need in life, because here's a guy who went out and accomplished this great goal and he still wasn't completely satisfied. But having been out and sailed with him and had that great adventure, that's something that I'm kind of looking back and saying, hey, personally, do I need to find, maybe adventure isn't what we necessarily, that's been satisfied. What's the next thing in life? Is it creating a family? Is it having a, something like that? So it's, I know I'm kind of mumbling here, but it's, you really, looking at Alex in the trouble that he was going through, it's, you kind of look back at yourself and say, hey, what's next for me? Yeah. So, it's been interesting to see that, and it has changed me for that reason, looking for myself, looking what's most important, a great job or a family or someone to love,
I was interviewing Alex right after he had sailed around the world, right before he passed. So for a few months, I spent a lot of time asking him every question I could think of. And when we weren't talking, I was, writing notes into my iPhone so that when I saw him again and had a camera pointed at him, I could follow up on thoughts that I had. And I guess a big question that I had for him when I was interviewing him was, you've fulfilled a dream. You left with a very clearly defined dream. You knew what you wanted, which not everyone does, and you went out and you did that thing. And you don't seem to be completely fulfilled right now. So what's the secret, man? How can we all sort of get to that happy place? What if sailing around the world made you happy while you were doing it, but then when you finish the journey and still have an itch to scratch, how do you keep scratching that? Or how do you scratch that itch? How do you learn to live in the present all the time? I guess it's something we were sort of exploring whilst making it?
Yeah. The way I think it changed me, it really just made me focus on what am I after? We did we sailed, we saw these beautiful, amazing things, and that may have been fulfilled. Like, what's next? I think that's what Alex was looking for. And I think it's still what a lot of us are looking for. I don't think there's not a clear plan for a lot of us. So I think it's me personally, it's kind of changed my focus on what I'm after. I think the travel has maybe been fulfilled for a while, and what's the next great thing is kind of where I'm at.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, guys, for sort of chatting through that. Like I say, the whole movie is emotional. It's really it's an emotional journey, and congratulations on sort of getting that part of it out. I mean, there's nothing worse than, I'm thinking about like sailing books can be very boring because somebody says, oh, and then I sailed across here and the wind was this much degrees off the nose, and then we landed at this anchorage and we put out 23 meters of chain. I don't think you ever mentioned how many meters of chain it took to make the boat stay at anchor. It was more about the journey, and I think that's what makes it really a fantastic movie. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, David, for having us. I can't get enough of those sailing stories myself. I read Webb Childs religiously, and he just, all he talks about is his speed over ground and how much chain he puts out, what type of anchor, all the preparation he makes. But when we made this, I love Webb. He's an incredible sailing writer, but we just wanted to make a more relatable, more human story, because we have a lot of friends and compadres who are not sailors. So we wanted this to work for them. If your adventure is not sailing around the world, what is it? Is it climbing a mountain? Is it learning to play the piano? Go do it now, I guess, was kind of what we were trying to say.
Excellent. Great. And did you guys know I actually had an interview with Webb Charles? You'll have to look that one up at some stage.
Oh, no way.
Oh, I'll go find it. Yeah, I can't wait to listen. He's a great guy.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thanks, you guys. Might wrap it up there. Like I said, I'll put the links in for where people can find the video and links to the Facebook page. Thanks so much for all the effort that you put into putting the movie together. I know you might have raised some money on Kickstarter and things, but I'm pretty sure most of the effort was on your own time, and you were probably thinking about it night and day. So thanks for that. I think you've really, you're just great friends for Alex, and you feel like guys that I'd like to sit down and have a beer with sometime. Hopefully we can do that one day.
Let's do it, David. I'd like that.
David. And I guess one thing we didn't mention is, we worked on this a lot. We mentioned Lori. There were a ton of other people that put a lot of work into this and a lot of favors. So it was people building the website, doing sound, graphics. Yeah. Topher has family members that did art for us. So it was a team effort. So it was we probably had 25 people we can't all thank right now, but thanks to all of you if you're all listening.
Yeah, and it's good. It's worth sitting through the credits at the end of the movie where you sort of mention a lot of people or the
there's some hidden gems in there. Watch the credits.
Like yeah. So
if you watched the movie and haven't stayed for the credits, go back there and watch the credits, because there's some outtakes that are worth seeing.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks again, guys. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to sharing this news with everybody.
Thanks, David.
Thanks so much, David.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks again, Ross and Topher, taking the time to have a chat about the movie. I could have sat there for hours listening to your stories and maybe swapping a couple with you as well. Now, I'll post links to some of the things we chatted about. Obviously, there's links to the movie on YouTube and links to the movie on Vimeo. I might look for a link to that book called Moonshine that was mentioned by Ross. I haven't heard of that one before. And I'll see if I can find some links to some pictures and descriptions of that Fast Passage 39. It sounds like a great boat. Well, thanks again for listening. I hope you have a great day, and thank you for joining us on our journey. You've been listening to David and Karina Anderson of the Sailing Podcast.